The previous 2 lessons in this chapter dealt with psychological and emotional issues to an extent not usually found in the teachings of yoga or Vedanta. The ancient rishis and revered teachers of Advaita, like Shankara, never taught anything about the unconscious mind or emotional pressure. These are obviously topics of modern origin. But that doesn't mean psychological and emotional issues were ignored in ancient times. These were addressed, but using different terminology than we do today. Traditional texts describe the need for antahkarana shuddhi, literally purity of mind, which they said was an indispensable prerequisite for gaining enlightenment. According to those texts, antahkarana shuddhi is the result of cultivating these 6 qualities or virtues. Each of them involves a process of psychological or spiritual growth. Shama, inner peace or tranquility, depends on addressing painful memories and other unconscious stuff that bubbles up, so to speak, into your conscious mind. Dhamma, self-control and discipline, requires managing the deep-seated desires and impulses hidden in the unconscious. Upadati, detachment, indifference towards worldly pleasures, depends on recognizing the fact that worldly pleasures can never result in perfect, unending peace and contentment. Titiksha, tolerance, patience, unconditional acceptance, requires the discovery of the true source of peace and contentment within. Shraddha, faith, depends on discovering the trustworthiness of the wisdom taught by the ancient rishis. And finally, samadhana, concentration, requires gaining the ability to focus your attention through the practice of meditation. Obviously, developing these 6 qualities or virtues is not a trivial undertaking. It requires tremendous commitment to psychological and spiritual growth. Patanjali gives some very simple and practical advice for cultivating purity of mind, which he refers to as chitta prasada. He says it's gained by cultivating friendship with happy people, compassion for those who are sad, admiration for saintly people, and indifference towards those who are sinful. According to Patanjali, purity of mind requires the cultivation of specific virtues like friendliness and compassion. But those virtues can't be cultivated as long as opposing traits remain present, traits like apathy, jealousy, and hate. So purity of mind requires the elimination of undesirable traits and attitudes. How can these be removed? Well, to purify water, you have to know what kind of impurities need to be removed. The processes that remove salt, dissolved minerals, or bacteria are completely different. The same is true for gaining purity of mind. You have to know what needs to be removed. In a Vedantic sense, mental impurities include anything that obstructs the discovery of your true inner self, Atma. From a broader perspective, mental impurity is anything that robs you of peace, happiness, and contentment, including anger, resentment, hurt, and anxiety. Fortunately, certain kinds of meditation can help remove all those impurities, as we'll see shortly. The study of psychology in the West is barely 100 years old. Modern neuroscience developed in our lifetimes. Yet, thousands of years ago, the rishis had already discovered certain important psychological insights. One of their insights was about samskaras, the mental impressions or conditioning that remain in your mind after you undergo any kind of experience. Every experience leaves a trace or impression on your mind, like footprints left on a sandy beach. If an experience is especially intense, it leaves a deeper impression. And if you have the same experience many times, the impression in your mind will grow even more deep. When mental impressions become sufficiently strong or deep, they form what's sometimes called a mental groove or channel. When such a channel gets established in your mind, your thoughts and emotions will be more likely to follow that mental groove. That's how habitual patterns of thinking get formed. This process is nicely explained by a traditional metaphor that compares samskaras to the ravines or canyons formed by streams. As water flows down a stream bed over many centuries, it gradually carves deeply into the ground. As the channel grows increasingly large and deep, it can collect even more water, and all that water helps it carve even more deeply into the earth. The constant flow of water over thousands and millions of years can cut even through solid rock. The Grand Canyon in Arizona was formed in this way. Samskaras, or habitual patterns of thinking, can be as deeply etched into your mind as the Colorado River is cut into the Grand Canyon. But then, how can you even hope to remove undesirable patterns of thinking? How can you break free from samskaras that produce mental impurities like anger, resentment, hurt, and anxiety? No doubt the Colorado River could never escape the towering walls of the Grand Canyon. But if it were somehow necessary to change the route of that river, it might be possible by redirecting its course before it even enters the canyon. By redirecting its course, the river could bypass the canyon entirely, and over millions of years, it would eventually carve out an entirely new canyon for itself. This example suggests a practical strategy for breaking free from undesirable patterns of thinking. Like the route of a river can be redirected, it's possible to redirect the flow of your thoughts. That's why a good way to break a habit is to replace it with a good one. For example, instead of reaching for a cigarette, a smoker could chew gum instead. In the same way, you can remove undesirable samskaras by replacing them with new, beneficial patterns of thinking. Scientists have recently discovered how habitual patterns of thinking are actually wired into the neurons of our brains due to a complicated mechanism they call neuroplasticity. They observe that when the same thoughts, emotions, or behaviors are repeated again and again, they actually produce physical changes in the brain. Technically speaking, the repetitive triggering or firing of a particular group of neurons trains them or predisposes them to continue firing together. This results in the creation of a new mental groove or channel, a new samskara. If a particular group of neurons is deliberately triggered again and again, a samskara can be formed. This property of the brain is exploited by certain meditation techniques whose purpose is to create beneficial new patterns of thinking. Those techniques belong to the category of contemplation, the third of the 4 basic kinds of meditation described in the introduction to this course. Whereas concentration practices involve focusing your attention on an object of meditation, and observation practices involve passively witnessing the activities of your mind, contemplation practices require you to invoke particular thoughts and emotions to create desirable new samskaras. The exercises in this chapter and the next are based on this third kind of meditation.